5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Five times Ireland have beaten the All Blacks in their history. 5 times since 2016 too. They meet again tonight. 4th time lucky for Man United as they finally get a win in the Europa League this season. Maybe Ruud was holding back on Ten Hag all along. 3 games undefeated for Shamrock Rovers in Europe as their Conference League adventure keeps getting better. They beat the Welsh champions last night and sit comfortably in the top 8 automatic spots. 2 is the number of All Irelands Donegal have ever won, but Michael Murphy wants 2 for himself, so he's back and he is on a mission. And of course, 1 big absence on the Friday panel today. We will forgive Joe this time. I imagine right now he is on his way into the Virgin Media television studios. There is a small matter of Ireland v New Zealand this evening, and he has no small job of presenting 4 hours of live TV to what will definitely, should be, over 1 million people watching. We wish him the very best of luck. Not that he needs it. He's been here before. He knows what he's doing. And you know what? We are in good hands because I am in good hands. We're going to be all right, I think so. And when I heard that Joe was off, I said this Friday panel, this Indo Sport podcast does not work unless we have at all times a top of the range Virgin Media sport presenter in the studio. So I'm delighted to say Virgin have held up their end of the deal. Joe goes one way, Tommy Martin goes the other way. Welcome aboard, Tommy.
Happy to be the super sub on this occasion, Conan.
And joining Tommy, we have a former All-Ireland Camogie champion with Cork, former Camogie player with Dublin, former midfielder with Cork City, Ireland underage captain, TG Cahir, underdog star, Sarah O'Donovan.
That's why I have no knee. Yeah, this is why I haven't ran since my mid-30s.
That's a way better billing than I got.
And it feels like a long time ago.
Alana in our production team said, what hasn't she done?
I'm going to work now. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing the grown-up part of my life now. So I'm taking that very seriously. That's what I'm doing now.
And the real glue of the Friday panel, Mr. Consistency, Mr. Utility Man, Mr. John Green, the group sports editor of the Sunday editions.
Thanks, Conan. I was about to get my coat, but you've redeemed yourself.
John, do you know, I took out about 4 superlatives there because you came over this morning and before I even saw you, I heard you ask, B team today, is it? How do you think that makes me feel, John? So on the agenda today, guys, we're going to talk about managers, how important they are. Amram has taken over at United. Hallgrimsson was speaking to the Irish media yesterday. And Derry, County Derry, league champions in March. Let's not forget that, just last March. Second favourites for the All-Ireland in April. They're still looking for a manager. It's 8th of November today. Mickey Hart left on the 8th of July. We'll talk more GAA a little bit as well. Players returning, probably because of the new rules. I have a hunch James McCarthy will not be returning, and John Hesslin has been hitting out at the schedule if we have time for that. Our sport and politics always go into mix, and of course, rugby. We'll go a bit more broadly about the rugby because I'm conscious of the kick-off time, but if you are listening to the show before kick-off, we have loads of Ireland All Blacks preview coverage waiting for you in the podcast feed. Ian Madigan and Cian Tracy were in on Tuesday. Andrew Trimble, Rory O'Connor were in yesterday. And you can obviously catch Joe tonight, 7 p.m. on VMTV. But I think this lends itself to a wider discussion. I don't know if you noticed, Tommy, in your Virgin Media echo chamber, but Irish rugby isn't that liked beyond these shores. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, you've picked up a little bit on it, obviously, with the stuff around South Africa in particular, and New Zealand, and I think maybe over the years there's been bits with Scotland and bits with Wales. I think that sort of cropped up, etc. But like all this has come in the years since Ireland have been good at rugby.
Yeah,
I mean everybody loved us in the 90s. You know,
plucky underdogs.
I was reading David McWilliams' piece at the weekend on business culture. He was writing about business culture and said one of the things with Ireland is that Irish people, and an aphorism for the business world, but it applies elsewhere, is that prefer to be liked rather than feared. And that was in the sort of the way that we use soft diplomacy, etc., to curry favour with at different levels around the business world. But if you look in the sporting world, it was always a case that we were more comfortable in the position of being liked rather than feared. And I think this is what the rugby team have done. It's almost like rugby's like a little petri dish. It's because it's quite small, and Ireland have got to the top of the pile or thereabouts. It's a kind of a petri dish of a place that we're not really used to being sort of consistently, which is, you know, a world leader. Now, even saying that, you're going to get your South Africans going, you know, I'm not going to do a South African accent here, but like you blew it on the big occasion again, and the Kiwis saying the same thing, you know, saying the same thing. But I think, you know, I think leaning into that kind of thing, I often wonder, like in the year, like since the defeat in Paris, like what was the missing thing? Like what was the little, what, like everything was there. They genuinely, those players, you know, did a lot of interviews around the time with them and heard them talk a lot. And I think on the night, being there on the night and afterwards, they were in genuine shock about what had happened. I think that they were so convinced that it was this was the moment. But I just wonder, is there still some little bit of the psyche that isn't quite comfortable with that thing of being the number one, the hated, the feared, the dominant, you know, the bully in the playground?
I don't think that applies to the players, but I think it applies to the rest of us watching it. Somebody made a point during the week, possibly Rudd, on the podcast about when we haven't watched Ireland for a while, we haven't seen them since July, and now our first time to see them will be against New Zealand. We're automatically kind of retreating back into ourselves. Oh, it's New Zealand, because we actually forget how good Ireland are. Because we're so used to, we've been conditioned, if you're a certain age, younger people don't have that problem, but if you're a certain age, you've been conditioned to think of Irish sport in a certain way as the plucky underdog of the 90s. What's changed, and this is something, Sarah, you can testify to, is the high performance mentality. That was the bit that was missing in Irish sport for so long, that we couldn't figure out, and we had to import it in all the different sports that we've done well at, or else our athletes had to be exported to other high performance cultures. But that was the bit that was missing, and our rugby team has it. And it was interesting listening to Andrew Turnbull talking about the build up to the All Blacks game in Chicago. There was just something different. Smith had brought something different, and there was a feeling that, oh, this could be the one, this could be the, you know, they'd lost 3 years earlier, blown it, and then they'd rehearsed for 3 years how to get over the line. So it's that was the last bit that was missing right across Irish sport in terms of athletics, swimming, whatever sport you want to pick. Soccer probably had it a little bit, but it's missing a bit at the moment. But it's because we just don't have the proper programs in place. But it was all about the high performance mentality, and we hadn't a clue, so we imported it.
I agree. I think that from a high performance point of view, and being in that environment and learning so much, we didn't have it, and it was holding us back. That's no question. But what I think people find hard outside of, say, the Irish group is that organisation piece. And I think they're more scared of the organisation and everything being so well planned that irks people the most. It's like, God, Joe Schmidt is really organised. You know, Andy Farrell's really organised.
Like someone who's did their homework way before everybody else.
And he's coming with his notebook, and that's what's annoying people more than the confidence that we have that has come from being so organised. And I think that's, on a world level, they're looking in going, God, they have done their homework again, you know.
Well, but like back to your sort of original point about that sense of there's obviously some resentment, you know, coming from various places. Like some of it is just the simple fact that they haven't done it at a World Cup. You know, that sort of piece, and it's kind of like the missing piece in the jigsaw, because they see everything else, but where do you go when you see, you know, all the organisational stuff, all the results are there, but then there's that, obviously there has been something that just hasn't clicked, and whether it's luck, and it, like,
I don't know, is it luck though? Because what I remember fundamentally from that New Zealand-Ireland game was the speed of the New Zealand players, and we didn't have that pace.
Well, what just to come back to the point again, like, and again, it's, look, we're never going to find the answer here, and I don't know if the players have, but they went 13 points to 0 down. They didn't start the game well. The players who have been absolute rocks for Ireland were making individual errors, but they still come back, and they closed by half time. They were back to within a point, and, you know, second half, obviously, you know, the 37 phases and the Kelleher try was held up. You know, it could have been different, but on the night, you know, something wasn't quite right there. And I don't know, like, you know, it's one of those things that where everything, as John says, all that high performance stuff is just absolutely the boxes we just ticked, and like they are just way up there in terms of all that high performance stuff. Like anytime you're around the whole psychological stuff and even that whole Andy Farrell team culture thing is so like it's so like powerful that what he's kind of built. You know, moving on from the Schmidt era, but again. What is it? Like, what was it? I mean, is it just a night where the opposition just, you know, were 100% and you were 90%?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
But then more broadly, as opposed to the point of Ireland being disliked, are we uncomfortable about that as Irish people as well? Because I think you were sort of touching on that at the start too, because I feel like we want a sweet spot between, you know, like the boring GA interviews that we'd always talk about, like we'd bemoan somebody not saying something, you know, oh, like they're just batting it away, they carry your eye almost. But we also sometimes don't want somebody who's going too far the other way, and maybe the Irish, I don't want to say boastfulness, but they definitely know they're good, and maybe that just doesn't sit too comfortable, and that we've been used to playing everything down as a nation.
There's a lot of confidence in Irish rugby, and confidence has always been something in Irish culture that's a very tricky thing. You know, confident people aren't always liked, you know, in day-to-day life in Ireland, and it took a long time for us to say that it's okay if you're good at something to be confident about. There was always outliers, you know, but generally speaking, in terms of Irish culture, that confidence was one of those things that was not seen as a good thing. And we were talking outside this morning about this, and we were talking. Colin posed a question. One of the legal guys was kind of sitting in. Tom he's from the UK, and Colin just posed the question about, you know, does it annoy other countries the way we've become so confident at rugby? And sorry, Tom, not meaning to put us down, he delivered the classic put down, which it wasn't meant as. It was just a statement of fact. Colin said, does bug you guys in England about how we are about rugby now? And he just, no, not really. Like, you haven't really won that much. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're right, actually. Yeah. So that was that, you know.
He was trying to side with us.
He was agreeing with us and trying to be understanding. But, I mean, that was basically it. You haven't really won that much. This is just a kind of the last decade or whatever, where we still have a lot of catch-up to do, you know.
The confidence thing, I think, you know, the Daniel Whiffen Olympics thing was really interesting in that, because in the sort of classic Irish, you know, Olympic success story, it's supposed to be, oh, here's this guy, you know, he swims in a river and he barely has enough money for a pair of goggles and he's come from nowhere and Jesus, where did he come? Like, oh, isn't he great? Yeah. And like but actually Daniel Whiffen was just a complete elite athlete. Absolutely knew he was an elite athlete.
Rhys McClenaghan too.
Yeah, you know, and Rhys McClenaghan as well. And but the thing about Whiffen is that But
he's in a high performance unit. He's day in, day out, you know, working psychologically, working with his team of people who've given him this confidence, and he can't switch that off now just because he's on the world stage. You know, he's prepared. Totally comfortable with it from being in a high performance unit, and had to go away to get that high performance unit as well.
So I suppose, like, just go back to your original point, like, I do think John is right. Like, you're talking about centuries of culture. Like, this stuff is really hard to sort of get over. And, like, you know, Daniel Whiffen going to stand up before Olympic finals saying, yeah, I'm the best in the field. Yeah. You know, people kind of go, jeez, you know.
But it must have been hard, Daniel.
Saying that. But he's like, yeah, he was. You know. Yeah. You know, that's still, we're still kind of dealing a bit with that. So
I saw a great clip on Instagram, and it was Tommy Tiernan he's touring America, and he was just doing a video of his tour bus, like this amazing machine with a double bed, kitchen, cinema room, you know, and he just kind of shows you around it, and he kind of pans to camera then and said, if Peg Sayers had this, she wouldn't have been as miserable. You know, it's that sort of, all this stuff is new to us. We were always a little bit behind.
I think that go back to the point David McWilliams was making, is the reason we wanted to be liked rather than feared is that, well, we couldn't be feared because we didn't have the resources or the power, so we had to use all that soft power and try and, you know, and we used, you know, our position in Europe to, like, the diplomacy side to get them to help us on the Brexit thing, or our little sort of funny position and around corporate tax and all that kind of stuff, and all that kind of
stroking is basically what you're describing.
we were likable and so
Don't mind us.
yeah,
Likeable rogues.
Yeah. Come into Ireland.
And then
Take care of you.
went and got good at rugby.
yeah.
But that's it, because it's not like this is all a thing of the past. It's like one sport or one athlete or a couple of them are sort of outliers still. This culture still prevails, and I know a lot of my examples I reach to is GA, but like I do think that goes across other sports as well, especially in this country. And there is still that culture of the changing room article. Like I remember a few years ago, walked into a changing room with club team, and there was an article on the wall. I had written the article. I previewed our game because I was working with another journalist, and we said, look, sure, I'll just write our one, but I'll put your name on it, and you can write your one and put my name on it. So there it was, an article that I had written, planted up on our own changing room wall. Look what that guy's saying about us. And I was standing behind everyone thinking, oh God. But we do seem more comfortable that way. And it's like, to your point, Tommy, Clifford does something amazing. We can say to people, he doesn't get paid. He's just playing with Fossa down there, like swimming in the river, no goggles. Like that's what we want to point out to people then as well.
It's exceptionalism in a space where it's not the norm is what we find the most appealing to us as sports fans in Ireland, I think, as opposed to it being nailed on.
But the interesting one about it, in that, is that within the GA, that's the sort of the other kind of an ecosystem within itself. There have been teams who, your Kilkennys or your
Dublins
6
in a row,
who have
Jim
been
Gavin.
comfortable with being the best and whatever their sort of process around that Kilkenny or Dublin would turn up in an All-Ireland final and not be uncomfortable with that sort of status. So it's all
But that was Jim Gavin.
Yeah.
He cultivated that over 6 years. Prior to that, it was, obviously Pat Gilroy started that kind of process in 2011.
And there's two guys extremely successful in their private lives, and they bring that, as you say, that kind of business, that organised mind into organising sport. And a lot of it is to do with the people that you bring in around you, and the people you have on the pitch,
Now, the issue as a player is that getting used to that, having come from an environment, say our club as an amateur player, where you're the best in the room, for your club, and then you're coming into that environment and you have to change to become part of the team. It takes getting used to, and that organisation piece nearly takes the fun out of the spontaneity of being a player and all the things that got you there in the first place. So it's a real mindset shift for players to come into that environment like the one that Jim Gavin created and feel comfortable in it and not feel like, I suppose.
And then they feel, when it comes to crunch in those last 5 minutes of big games, that we've done the work, we know what we're doing here. And that's where, I guess, the belief comes from, and for those teams.
But it's growing. So you're talking about Derry doing really well in April and then not being able to...
What a passive-aggressive comment from you.
Yeah,
there,
I know. But if they had, say, 5 years with Jim Gavin, and reached the pinnacle, or Armagh 10 years with, with McGeaney.
When something goes
it's time.
bad.
You can't switch it on in 6 months. Mickey Hart didn't have the time that he needed to create the culture, and now he's gone. Yeah,
and there's not a fatalism then in the culture. Like when something goes bad, it's not like, here we go again. It's like, no, we're going to be fine because Jim has done his homework.
The Pat Gilroy Bernard Brogan one is always a great example of how, of exactly what you're talking about, how he took ostensibly the best forward on the Dublin team at the time and made him even better, and he did it by dropping him consistently over a period of a National League campaign. He kept dropping him, and he was shooting the lights out in training, and he goes and he said, why are you dropping me? You're shooting the lights out. I'm shooting the lights out in training. That training session was about the number of tackles. You didn't have any tackles.
Yeah.
And he just kept doing it, and then slowly reintroduced him to the team. And I mean, that was Brogan Mark II then, and he was like, we all remember how phenomenal he was.
Yeah.
But he had to adjust how he played the game and how he thought about it before he could get back in.
Yeah. The segue that you guys have teed up for me on my first day in Joe's chair is just brilliant. So thank you guys, because we want to talk about managers, and Ruben Amorim is taking over on Monday at Manchester United. He's only 39. Now, Ruud has gone and won a cup game. He's won a European Cup game. Europa League Cup game. He's got a good draw with Chelsea. And they're ditching him out, but they're bringing in Ruben Amorim, who does look like a good appointment. I want to talk about, do we underrate managers or do we overrate them? But Sarah, I believe you're a Manchester United supporter.
Lapsed Man United supporter.
A lapsed supporter?
Yeah.
Hang on a second.
I've met a few of them in recent times.
Yeah, I was saying to Ronan that I've been to 2 United games in the last number of years. So I was at Man United, Man City back in 2019 at the Etihad. United won it.
Oh, yeah.
Against the run of play. And then I was in Old Trafford, January 22. They beat West Ham. Rashford comes off the bench, scores the 93rd minute. Rapturous. You can't, like we were heading out the gate, and he puts it in the back of the net. But Ronaldo was playing that day, and he was walking around the field.
Okay.
What is going on? There was no high press from Ronaldo that day. It wasn't attractive. Yeah. I'm lapsed. I'm coming in and out.
Yeah, you're lapsed until when?
It'll be something that'll spark my attention. Say Martinez coming to United. I was like, oh, there's a bit about this guy. The way he warmed up, I was so excited. Right? I don't know if you've seen him. He was so aggressive in his warm ups that I was like, do you know what? I might actually throw an eye over this again. And they've sucked the life out of him. So I'm hoping that Amorim comes in and gives him back the joy that he evidently had when he first came to Old Trafford. And I think what we're talking about managers, and we've kind of teed it up, is I think a manager has to create a safe space for every player in the group to perform and to improve. And that would be 25 years of experience. My experience as a 19-year-old going into the Cork senior camogie team was a very different experience to my experience as a 30-year-old going into the Dublin senior camogie team. And I think managers have to be fundamentally aware of where people are at in their, performance or life when they're coming into teams to really give them the best opportunity to improve. Because as a 19-year-old, I was confident, but that looked arrogant. And for a 30-year-old in the setup already, they're going, would she ever settle down?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But the manager, I don't think, ever bridged that gap between the young players and the older players in that setup, from my experience.
That's emotional intelligence you're kind of hinting at there. I think anybody who's good can make any group of players better. How much better, I don't know. I mean, and I think he will absolutely make them better, and they will move up the league table. But I don't know how much better they will be, because some of the players we're going to have to see a completely different type of performance from some of the players that he has. But in simple terms, structure, belief, unified dressing room, a system which they haven't had for a couple of years now, you would think that already Van Nistelrooy has put a structure on them, and he's put players in kind of their proper positions, and they've improved a little bit. I mean, not hugely, but they were okay against Chelsea in spells. But if this guy has anything about him, which he seems to have, he will immediately make them better, I think. But how much better, I don't know. I think that's unknowable at the moment. Yeah.
Are you, Tommy, allowed to declare allegiance to any team in your position?
Other than Donegal?
No, I often get accused of various.
I was going to say, because it's funny.
No, I'm a Celtic fan, born and raised. I was born,
of course.
Yeah. So I'm the Donegal Celtic Mafia. It's sort of up there. Yeah, my father's Glaswegian, so we were sort of inculcated in the one true faith from an early age. None of that. The Premier League is often
none of that guff.
Yeah, anytime a Premier League team gets beaten in Europe, I always get texts from my dad, sort of crying, there you go, I'll Premier League this, but. So I've been observing the big English clubs professionally for a long time now, and it's dispassionately, if you like, despite accusations from various viewers who often text in and say you're.
It is funny though. Yeah. Those because a lot of football journalists would feel like they can't talk about who they're written for, but you're going to get accused.
Yeah, I think
anyway.
But I think now that Sky Sports literally employ. Two of their main pundits are sort of tribally partisan for the two main English teams, and I mean, one of the English broadcasters had Noel Gallagher in commentary for the Man City game during the week, so that ship seems to have sailed a bit. But and I don't like doing, because we do Celtic games in Champions League, I don't like doing them because I do find myself getting...
Would you get involved, yeah?
I just can't, I can't be as dispassionate as I'd like to be, and I can feel sort of emotion coming into what I'm talking about, and I don't think that's right in my job. But obviously I can't say I'm not coming into work today because we're doing the Celtic game. But to get back onto the topic, like, I think it's really interesting because the role of the manager in professional football has changed so much in my lifetime. Like, I remember the big Ron days, the Brian Clough days, where it was the figure in the manager's office with, the bottle of whiskey and the phone, and, ringing up, berating journalists and then getting somebody else on the phone to get a few players on loan. And he was the titanic figure, and maybe there was a chairman that he spoke to once a week. But and the manager was sort of like, he embodied the club. And I think that sort of model is still what we see every day, because we turn on Sky Sports News and it's the manager doing the press conference and the manager doing the post-match, and it's all about the manager. Is he under pressure? Is he going to turn things around? Is he the right man for the job? Is he the wrong man for the job? What about his signings? What about his recruitment? What about his man management? And actually, underneath what's happening in professional football now is that the whole role is completely changed. And Antonio Conte, when he was at Spurs, he came out and he said, "Why am I doing all these press conferences every day? Like, you're asking me about stuff that I have nothing to do with, because there's, a director of football, a director of recruitment, a chief executive, and they're all making all these decisions. In Italy, the general manager, guy in a suit, comes on TV before every Serie A match and talks away about, well, yes, we're hoping to contract for this guy, and we're hoping to do this, and we're going to put a new roof on the stadium, and, the federation are made of balls of this or whatever. And the coach talks about the tactics and the football. So basically what's happened, if you look at what's been really interesting, is that the successful clubs in England, just to take that over the last few years, have been the ones that have had the right structure behind the scenes. So Manchester City brought the guys, executives from Barcelona, built their recruitment, etc., around that structure, and then and Liverpool had their structure as well with the Fenway Group and the recruitment and Michael Edwards and all these guys. But both of them had two figurehead managers that set the tone and set the, dictated the whole energy and the mood around the clubs within that. So to finish the point, what about United? Their structures have been an absolute shambles for a decade. Like an absolute, just the post-Glazer, David Gill and Ferguson going, and it just been a complete, mess. And Ed Woodward being really good at getting noodle partners in Singapore, thought he could wander in and do transfer deals, and then bringing in various sporting directors and trying to set up some kind of structure that just never seemed to be able to keep pace with what their rivals were doing. Have the Ineos crowd sorted that out with Dan Ashworth and all these other guys? And are they going to give Amorim that platform that Klopp and Guardiola have had for the last however many years to go and transform that club and be aligned with the manager and not have the manager go in and basically sink into a quagmire, which has kind of happened for his predecessors?
If you take what you're saying there and you think about the history of Manchester United, they've had two golden ages, and both were under the old system that you described, under Busby and under Ferguson. And even in how Ferguson won that last league title, I'll never know. Even by then, the cracks were shown. They haven't, from towards the end of the Ferguson era and up to now, to this point today, they haven't shown any of what you're talking about, of that structure behind the scenes. There's an attempt to put it in place now, but the jury is still out on it. But I think it's going to take at least until the start of the next season before we can say, yeah, this new structure is bringing the club in the right direction. But it has never had that, what you're talking about, that other clubs have managed to figure out.
And that has to be the fear for United fans, is that the club has proven so ungovernable in terms of it's like, so I can't remember who made this point, like you almost have to manage the past, manage the present, and the squad, etc., and manage sort of the future in terms of building for that. Because every few months, United come out with a new tracksuit that's got the Lee Sharp era, like retro. It's retro. All about that sort of, even Ruud van Nistelrooy coming in for these few games, like it's been such a big part of who they are. Can't and
that happened with Liverpool when they went through
Yeah.
their slump. They were
Because it's
constantly
like,
looking to the
you know-
past and looking to the stand, and you'd see a row of
yeah,
these
a happy
European
place.
Cup winners
Yeah.
looking at you. A little bit of
That row, that's such a good point. You would just look up, or the camera would pan to it,
Kevin
Kenny
Keegan and
Dalglish,
Phil
Rush.
Thompson, Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah.
Oh, Christ.
And it's always showing you them overlooking another
Now
drawers.
it's Ferguson and it's Cantona, and it's just I think Dennis Irwin was there the other
Yeah,
day.
and you don't see that much at Anfield anymore, either,
No.
because it shows the context as well that all these clubs are in. Because Liverpool obviously look at Amorim, who's clearly a very good manager, and he'll probably do a good job, but they look at it and think we don't need him right now. He's going to change too much about our club. We'll get somebody else that'll fit our club better. But United needs
Slot
someone.
one now. Not to say Slot isn't a top manager, but he is literally like, I'm going to unscrew this elite manager and put in this other elite manager.
Slotted in.
He's literally
Yeah, John.
slotted in. Like he's not been told to go in and talk about the Slot era. He's a sort of continuation of a component part of a working
It's
system.
like he's come into a perfectly tuned Formula One car,
Yeah.
and he's allowed to make a few minor tweaks, which he's done. But in essence, the car is still the car.
Yeah, but United need someone to help shape like Villa walked themselves up a Steven Gerrard cul-de-sac, so they need someone to come in and completely just take over, and then they can be guided by that.
But I think the thing is, can Amorim get the buy-in that, like, the culture needs to change there? That, like, the dressing room, from what you hear, has been a big issue. Why is the dressing room a big issue? Because the culture of the club has allowed, behaviours and things to fester that haven't been dealt with. The manager obviously hasn't had the right authority. Like, I heard, and I think Ten Hag had sort of become a bit of a joke figure. Like, I heard second or third hand from one of the players that this thing of where the defenders, if players are running through, you're not supposed to go and run to the other guy's attacker. You have to stay and mark your own attacker, even if he's going to run through and goal. And so you've seen United could see goals like that because Ten Hag says, trust your keeper, just don't get caught. And that might make sense in a certain way, but it's clear that Ten Hag hasn't had the overall authority or been able to sort of have that sort of complete buy-in. And some of that's obviously his fault, but I also think some of it is just the sheer difficulty with whipping that place into shape as it's been.
But I think every dressing room needs a strong manager from the outset, and I've seen over the years.
I was about to ask you, have you ever been in a toxic dressing room? Have you been? Is that something you can say? Or
I wouldn't say a toxic dressing room, but I would say I've been in dressing rooms where players haven't wanted other players to succeed because competition means that if you succeed, I'll lose out. And I think going back to really successful teams, the Kilkennys and the Dublins, there were players losing out because, other players were better. And being able to almost iron out that toxicity in the sense that you don't want somebody else to succeed because they're going to be replacing you is probably the fundamental thing that a manager needs to manage.
Instead of say, okay, you're better than me, so now my job is to get better than you. That's the healthy version of that.
The healthy version of that is saying, okay, you've set the bar. I'm going to chase you in a positive way.
Example of that, weren't they?
Yeah. I think that's the fundamental thing that you have to get right in a dressing room is, I'm 19. I'm going after the corner forward who's 24. She's been around the dressing room. She's really well liked. Okay, I'm in order to, get that position on the pitch, I'm going to piss some people off, because they're her friends. And they're not going to give me the ball because, maybe I'll be better and maybe she'll lose out.
Yeah.
And it's about getting rid of that toxicity and realising that we're all going for the same goal. You know what I mean? And it's going to be uncomfortable for you.
But this is good because you've been in a changing room recently then. So it's like, what do players want, though? Because I think a level of self-governance is good, but then there can be too much of it then very quickly. So the manager has to set the tone. The manager has to clamp down on things. You'd often hear a lot of Premier League pundits saying, oh, well, the players are different nowadays. They don't want to be bullied. think some of them do. I think the group as a large want somebody who can whip them into shape, but they also want to have a say. Do you know, I look at the Derry example now. Players are having too much of a say at the minute, I'd say, probably in terms of, you know, who's coming in. And on one level, it's like, well, they have to deal with him. And on another level, it's like, well, you know, fair play to them. They want the best. What they can actually just do with somebody coming in and telling them what's what. And it's a way like Gallagher was successful because he just took complete control over all of them.
But, you know, listening to Joe Canning a couple of weeks ago saying he was, you know, heading down to Davy Fitz with the Maiwadi and the biscuits to convince him into Galway. And I was like, is it really that simple? You know, was Joe going to dictate that? Is that healthy in the long run when you're looking at a county like Galway or, you know, I suppose Kerry as well, you know? You remember the Wexford lads heading to get Davy to stay on in Wexford? Like, where was the disconnect between, say, the structure at United and individual players wanting one thing and then the organisation wanting something else? Like, how do you marry the two? And, you know, why does Joe head off in the car to meet Davy on his own?
To me, when you see players doing things like that, what that says to me is what you mentioned, the organisation. That means there's a vacuum in the organisation and they're filling that vacuum. If there's no vacuum for them to jump into, then that doesn't happen. Yeah,
agreed. I think that requires, though, massive transparency from the top.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where
that was the Richie Hogan stuff was great insight into how Kilkenny worked. And you know that it was, you know, who was it, Jackie Terrell himself, like hammering the shite out of each other in practice matches, like.
And Tommy Walsh saying, you were the guy coming in with all the confidence and we targeted you. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's great insight to have. Yeah. Women don't have that same honesty, and, you know, nobody's going to turn around to me and say, you are pain in the behind. You know, we wanted to, you know, take a bit of confidence off of you. Okay. Whereas men will confidently say that to each other and go, oh, okay.
Yeah, but you talk about that, though, in your own dressing room. You'd say, we want to take her down a peg or two in the opposition team.
It was never. It's inferred, but it's never as straight as, you know, Richie Hogan taking Jackie on and welting him 3 times in the chest. Yeah. That wouldn't be allowed. You know, yeah.
That's another podcast.
I think the interesting with those scenarios, and like you used to hear us a lot about the Dublin thing that Jim Gavin sort of modestly would say, well, I'm just a facilitator for what the players want to do. And that a lot of those became, you know, so successful because he put the structure in place, etc. But they had that sort of self-governing, you know, self-policing motivation within those sort of like again, go back to the system. There were all these component parts that it wasn't the manager going around shouting at people and saying like, you lads are a bunch of wasters. Like basically there were parts of the team running themselves. And again, like that energy within the Kilkenny team was that basically once those lads had, you know, they were at that point where they knew what the team needed. They knew what this team was about because Cody had obviously laid it down. And part of that was if you come in here fresh off, you know, having scored a load of points in the county championship as a, you know, a teenager or whatever, we're gonna test your mettle. And if you survive that, then good on you.
I suspect we'll start hearing, it's too soon, but I suspect we'll start hearing similar stories from the Dublin dressing room in the next few years. Philly McMahon's the only one who's really given us that insight into, but there was a very similar culture there. But as those players move on into their retirements now, I think, and you know, the inevitable books start to happen.
And you'll remember players who didn't fit the mould, and exceptional players. I'm thinking Cha Fitzpatrick, like, you know, fabulous hurler, now living in China. Has won All Irelands, was an All-Star, you know, but didn't necessarily fit Brian Cody's
Dermot Connolly as well.
Reception.
Dublin, you know, kind of just free.
There was another guy, John Mulhall. Is his name Mulhall? He played for Kilkenny as well. Again, just slightly unorthodox. Didn't fit the Kilkenny narrative. Didn't stay that long. You know, whereas other guys quite happy to fit and stayed there for 20 years.
Yeah. And just to put a bow on it, like that's what Ten Hag tried to do at the start. It was like, these guys don't fit, we're going to root out the bad eggs. But then it turned out all he wanted then was more Dutch League players to fit exactly what he wanted. But United did win in the Europa League last night. Shamrock Rovers, we mentioned at the top, also won. They beat TNS 2-1. Johnny Kenny, I don't know if you saw the Farouja flick onto him. It was absolutely gorgeous. Brilliant finish from Kenny. And Dylan Watts got the winner for Shamrock Rovers. But also in the Europa League last night, Ajax were playing Maccabi Tel Aviv in Amsterdam. There was a lot of trouble outside the stadium. 62 people were arrested. 5 were hospitalised after rioters attacked the Tel Aviv fans. There was all sorts of tension yesterday in the Dutch capital. A Palestine flag was ripped down at one stage. A pro-Palestine demonstration had been banned. Then riot police had blocked another pro-Palestine march, but the violence still broke out anyway. This is the sort of topic that I personally, like, I've been in sports journalism now for 13 years, and I always struggled, you know, when sport and politics mix. I know the famous saying, stick to football or whatever. I know myself, I think maybe it's just not a strength of mine. I don't know how comfortable I am in being so authoritative about topics like this so seriously. I don't know what it is. I wonder, Tommy, when you're covering something like this on live TV, how do you feel about broaching it? Because sometimes this stuff can happen very quickly, and then you're having to sort of cover it delicately.
It's a good question. I think you have to bear in mind what you're there for, and what your expertise is, and that you don't necessarily have the expertise that somebody who's got, you know, who's covered this area in depth, like the political aspects of various, you know, sporting affiliations, you know, and how, like, something like should Israeli teams be competing in European football at the moment? You know, from and then when you're doing that in the context of, you know, rounding up a European a program that's covering, here's bringing you all the goals from around European football, I don't think you can probably do it justice.
Yeah.
And I think while I think, you know, there's obvious real question marks about Israel playing in international sport at the moment that people would have genuine and justified grievances about. I don't think you can sort of say, right, there's Man United and PAOK, a good win for Man United there. Okay, let's briefly move on to the conflict in the Middle East now and talk about, you know, you end up just, you're not going to do the story or the issue justice. So all you do is just report the facts. If a game's been abandoned or if there's been riots, and you can only report the facts and leave it to the, you know, leave it to the experts. Because
it has been like a politically charged week.
Yeah, it has. You see, the sport and politics are absolutely intertwined, but that doesn't mean that we have to always go out to try and intertwine them even more. But there's like the Trump this week is he's a genuine sports fan, for starters. And unusually for a politician, he doesn't really use sport to endear himself to the public. You know, he just, if someone is interested, if someone wants to worship at the altar of Trump, who's a big sports star, good luck to them. And he brings Bryson up and he brings Dana White up on stage the other day. He's had people coming out endorsing. He was on Bill Belichick's podcast the day before the election. But sport is so big that we have to be very careful about how we talk about sport and politics. Trump is like the ideal figurehead for big sport, isn't he? I mean, because it's all about yourself and money, and that's the big sport that we follow in the distance. Professional football, American football. It's not necessarily the sport that's part of our everyday lives. If you're involved with a club team or a county team, or if you're covering sport, it's a slightly different nuance. But the kind of sport that he represents, he's the perfect figurehead for it, because he exactly reflects what sport has become. And as fans, we're complicit to the sense that we watch it, and we know that the owners of Man City and Newcastle, you know, are dodgy. But we watch Man City and Newcastle, and kind of the fans are kind of trying to plod their way through this minefield of, I know the World Cup in Qatar and Russia, it wasn't great, you know, but Trump's going to be the president of America when the next World Cup, but at least he'll be allowed to protest, and, you know, there's... Yeah.
The best example of this was the first broadcast on BBC of the Qatar World Cup.
Yeah.
You know, Gary Lineker came on air and basically did an intro which was referred to...
He addressed all the
all the stuff about Qatar that had been dominating the build up about human rights and worker rights abuses and LGBTQ etc. And then it was like, okay, we've done that. It's here. But we need to go and talk about
It's here.
Who's playing up front for England now.
Yep.
So there's and it's the same every time Manchester City come on. I mean, I think I remember at some point early when they sort of got to the Champions League final, bringing it up on air about what did we think about this. About this is essentially an Abu Dhabi project that has come to fruition now and is now the dominant force in European football. And I'm sure I tend not to pay attention, but I'm sure there were lots of complaints from Man City fans saying, why are you sullying this great moment for the club by bringing up that stuff? And again, with Newcastle, the people, I watched the coverage of Newcastle when they were on the rise, and it was sort of almost like, oh, this is a fairy tale. And it's like, it's not a fairy tale. But at the same time, I look at the fans and you can say, in one sense, you can kind of go, how can you celebrate, your team doing well, given what Saudi Arabia has done? But are you going to talk to somebody who's like a Newcastle, and like Newcastle fans, that's their identity. Like they watch the club through the eyes of their fathers and their mothers and their grandfathers, and it's literally like it's in them to a degree that it's very easy to sit here and say you should stop supporting Newcastle because of the Saudis. Well, they're not going to do that. So that's the complexity of what you're talking about when we talk about that subject of sport and politics.
Yeah.
That is why it's so emotive and hard to tease out.
And I think though sport is a very powerful thing, when it is mixed with politics. And I'm remembering the Bows and Palestine game in May. Aisling O'Reilly did an amazing interview with Charlotte Phillips, whose grandparents were Palestinian, and she said they've tried to, get rid of us, and they won't. And it was the first time that I had kind of put, I suppose, faces to the conflict and faces to the genocide, and she made it so real for me, in Dublin that night, and I was deeply impacted by that because she was an 18-year-old girl just wanting to survive, and her grandparents were with her. So I think there can be a space for sport and politics, but it has to be managed. Rory McIlroy talking about Trump this week and his potential involvement in the Live issue. I don't think that's relevant. Palestine playing Bows and really showcasing what it is that they're trying to save was powerful.
The Celtic fans waving the Palestinian flag as well. There's something powerful about that as well, and it's impossible to get away from, and it goes beyond politics too. I think not that you have to leave your morals at the door, but when you are supporting, especially like a Premier League club, like I was on here a few weeks ago professing my love for Jack Grealish to Joe, and Jack Grealish had been caught drink driving before, which I think is the lowest, one of the lowest things of all. But like there I am saying, but you want to see the way you can touch a football? You almost switch something off.
We have that awareness, and we have this ability as humans to be able to compartmentalize things, and it doesn't make us bad people, or it just means that there's so much going on for everybody. We have our little releases, and we know most of us are people of good conscience, and we understand the nuances around it. But a game of football is still a game of football, or an American football game is still an American football game. And if Bill Belichick wants to have Trump on his podcast, look, I'm not going to be listening to it, but okay, do it if you must,
I remember being really disappointed when Eddie Howe took the Newcastle gig. I had seen him do an interview years ago when he was with Bournemouth, right? And I was so impressed by him. This was at the very beginning, I'm talking 7-8 years ago. And when I realised he was going to Newcastle, I was like, Jesus, Eddie.
Well, what about Pep then,
I know, but I'm saying that's something at the time I couldn't disassociate Eddie from the job, even though I admired him massively for what he did at Bournemouth.
And look, just to go like even bigger level than that, though, the idea of sport and politics. I mean, the Saudi Arabian deal was ushered through by the Boris Johnson Tory government. That they essentially said, you got to let this happen because it's got trade implications for us. And that's something that then football fans kind of go, why is everybody talking about about us when this is just the world. You know, this is the world we live in. The thing that that motivates me in it, though, what I sort of want to talk about is for most of us, sport is this really pure thing, like, and it kind of harkens back to our childhood, and the reason we love it is because we sort of, you know.
Yeah, but that's the sport that we can touch and feel ourselves.
No, but even that idea of sitting and watching Messi dribble through 3 players, you know, or, you know, you see somebody do a bicycle kick and match of the day, and you just get that sort of that purity of what it is. That's why it attracts the political influence, because it's this thing that people want to get a hold of and use, whether they're nations or companies or, you know, bad actors of any kind. They want to use this. You know, that's what the sports.
But sport is political at every level. I've been a county board delegate.
Yeah,
but I've been a club secretary.
Yeah,
I've been an underage inter-county coach. It's all politics. I mean, we all remember the great thing that, you know, once upon a time, you know, the GA was seen as you know, Fianna Fáil at play.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the and I've been in situations, and I grew up in a house where my father was a county secretary for my entire childhood. So I've seen a lot.
The wrangling.
I've seen a lot of dirty strokes pulled.
Yeah.
To go back to how we started about, you know, pulling strokes. Sport at every level is political, and at the highest level it is incredibly political, and we see some really unsavoury things, and it's the bad politics, the bad actors, as you said, of sport at their worst.
Well, look, where did it all start? Bread and circuses, Roman emperors wanting to curry favour with the public. It's always been a thing that politics has used, you know, for its own benefit.
Going back to the sorry, just one point. Going back to the strokes, because when I knew we were going to be talking about this, because I'd had this sense over the last while that sport has been getting a lot of money in Ireland recently. And so I just went through. I know I'm going to be throwing a lot of figures of you, but you'll get the basic point. Since September, 173 million for major sports projects, 26 million for sports equipment, 230 million for community sports facilities, 2 million for local sports partnerships outdoor programmes, 500,000 for Gaeltacht and GAA programmes, 800,000 for 2 GAA clubs to support Irish, 5 million for local sports partnerships to target disability women in sport. And I know a little bit about sports partnerships, and they are good, and people with disability. Like, I'm looking at that's since September, and I'm wondering, like, was Simon Harris the only person who didn't know that there was an election coming around the corner? Because there's been over 500 million given to sport since September in this country.
Yeah.
There's sport and politics at its finest.
Yeah.
And unlike the old days, you know, I've drilled down in this, and it's something I know a little about. A lot of this is good money that's being well spent, and it goes back to what we started off talking about, high performance. All this money has been funneled into places to make us better at high performance, and given facilities all over the country. We still have a long way to go in terms of making the facilities available to everybody, etc. But there's sport and politics there in its, you know, in its
purity.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's right. Pure, like, that's in its purest form. And you're talking about moments pulling us back to sport, and why politics and sport, I suppose, why politics follows sport or tries to grab onto the best parts of it. I'm thinking of Garnaccio's overhead kick, and it stopped. I'd say it stopped the world. You know, we must have watched it 10 times on repeat, that amazing goal. And then we go back to our lives. And these are the things you remember.
There's a question. What's the last thing in sport that stopped you in your tracks and you went, oh, shit?
Like, that happens to me every week. Like, I am such a sucker.
David Clifford's overhead pass was the last time I can remember going.
Really?
The guy, the NFL guy, jumped backwards over somebody's head.
Del Beckham. Oh no, sorry.
Last Sunday.
Yeah. His name. That was. I just had to give
I must be getting more cynical.
I watched the dressage at the Olympics. Isabel Werner, is it? The 57-year-old lady with her horse, and I cried. And
really?
and I have no idea why, but the outpouring of emotion watching that lady make the horse dance was my moment of the summer. And
there you go.
And I've said that live on air.
That's amazing. One man who has been very good at campaigning in his first term and now his second term is Jim McGuinness. He was very good at galvanising everybody in Donegal for this one cause. I remember I used to work in Donegal in a newspaper covering Inishowen, the peninsula, and Moville, who didn't have any players anywhere near the county team, and they were doing a fundraiser, and all proceeds were going to the Donegal training kitty. This is back in 2013. I was like, what? Like, I'm trying to imagine my club doing it, especially in Derry at the time, who were no hopers, and nobody would be handing over money to the county that they're not going to see. And it just showed the power of Jim McGuinness.
But there's the power of a manager as well,
Exactly.
Who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, somebody who can lobby, and he can lobby Michael Murphy, who said he was done, he's finished, he's not coming back, and he is back, and you must be just about to move back up.
Just because he can stand at the edge of the square now and he doesn't have to move.
This came out on Wednesday, wasn't it? The day that Trump won the election, and honestly, I was like, it just totally changed my mood. I was like, fine, the free world's been run by a madman, but Michael Murphy's back, so
Donegal's not
just about balances. I genuinely thought he'd gone off to into the sun, ridden off on his horse, with living legend and football review committees. The Donegal Football Championship is called the Michael Murphy Sports and Leisure Donegal Championship. So you could turn on the radio in Donegal and go, Michael Murphy scored 2 goals and 5 points in the Michael Murphy Sports and Leisure to lift for his club. He's just an absolute
So what do you do with him? Do you put him at the edge of the square and kick it into him, or do you put him on the 40-metre arc and tell him to stick over the 2-pointers all day?
Well, there you go. I mean, you've got options, don't you? I always thought it was really that his sort of his Indian summer of his career would be back sort of playing number 14 on the edge of the square, and he would do that until he basically fell over, and he'd always be there. And I think the nature of Gaelic football in the last few years was his career was that he just couldn't, because I remember watching the Ulster final the year Derry beat Donegal extra time, and Michael Murphy chasing in vain back after Brendan Rodgers deep into injury time, and just kind of thought, or extra time.
That's not what he was put on this earth to do.
That's not what he's put on this earth to do.
Well, what does this do for Oisin Gallen? Gets an All-Star at 14. And, the winter, all of a sudden, Michael Murphy wants his jersey.
Well, they need 3 of them. They need 3 of them to stay up there, and now Donegal are well.
Well, I think to be fair, when you watched the All Ireland, the quarter final, or the semi final defeat to Galway, you just thought Donegal just lacked 1 or 2 more arrows in their, in their goal.
Nearly there.
Galway had said, right, we'll deal with the attacking halfbacks, because I think Donegal had averaged 6 points from their backs in this championship before that game, and they only got 1 that day. Yeah. They dealt with that, and then they left players up, to stop that, and that was the few points of difference in the game, and you just kind of felt that they just didn't have that. And I know what you said if you're Oisin Gallen, and he's like, I'm the new Michael Murphy.
Hang on a moment, Michael's back. Yeah.
My 14-year-old son said exactly that yesterday.
Did he?
Yeah, and he was going Oisin Gallen ahead of Michael Murphy. This was his take on it.
But the other thing about Michael Murphy is...
No, Mead.
The other thing about Michael Murphy is he has the most powerful, quietly charismatic, authoritative presence that one of the most... I know obviously he's partisan, but he's one of the few people I've sort of felt a bit starstruck around, because he has this sort of just this unbelievable presence about him. Remember, he got Donegal captaincy at the age of 21?
Yeah.
And he was the guy when McGuinness called him into had the meeting in Rossapena, and laid down, this is what you need to do, and who's on board. He was the first up out of his chair, said, sign up for all that, and they all just funneled in after him.
Wow.
And he's like there were a lot of experienced players in that.
Yeah.
In that squad, even at that stage, albeit they'd had a few tough days. I mean, Neil Gallagher was the captain when they won the league in 2007, but he just had that. He always just had that unbelievable presence, and I think he's so respected. He's nationwide, but in the county he's revered, and I think being around. I mean, if they were there this year, to being a couple of points away from an All Ireland final against a team that they'd beaten twice in the year before, is that the extra 5%, or I mean, what you're saying, Sarah, does that actually could it undermine some of the younger players?
In terms of having that focal point now, you take Ronaldo out of United, you take Michael Murphy out of Donegal, then you put him back in.
He's a different, as Tommy.
I know,
he's
a different
personality. I think.
Totally.
You just feel like when you love a sport like Gaelic football or hurling, and I don't know, some people have different. For me, the number one thing in Gaelic football is I love the people who are just dripping in talent. Just naturally talented.
So the Dermot Connollys who can literally spin a ball on the outside.
Girls, or Matt Connor way back in the day, and like Michael Murphy, in terms of natural ability, he was just unbelievable, and that was the thing that you'd always. And the modern game did him down a bit, really. Yeah.
What if he's lost a yard?
I'd say he's lost more than a yard, but I mean, he might need it in these new rules.
Well, look, he was on the. I mean, the line was he wrote the rules to
suit himself.
To come up. So, like, I mean, he was involved in it. He knows he's seen all the sandbox games and the.
So it's the Michael Murphy Donegal Championship, the Michael Murphy rules.
Yeah, the Michael Murphy rules committee. So he obviously feels, and McGuinness feels that this can give him a new lease of life, and I think if Michael Murphy haven't, and I mean taking away the partisan Donegal aspect, if we get another couple of years of Michael Murphy in inter-county stage with these new rules, then that's validation for the or players like that can have a life.
Well, Stephen Campbell is that kind of a role where 20 minutes comes in, does this job repeatedly, rinse and repeat for Donegal. Would Michael Murphy be happy to do that kind of a role? It'll be interesting to see how many minutes he expects to get every.
There's no way Jim McGuinness is bringing him back as a gimmick. There's no if he's coming back. Him and Jim have clearly sat down and plotted out. Jim said, "This is what I'm thinking. How do you feel about that?" And it could well be what you're saying. How do you feel about that? Yeah, I'm up for that. Yeah, give that a go. I can see that working.
But the amazing thing is that there was just no inkling from any of his. He's done loads of media. He's done punditry. He's done columns. He's done interviews around the football review stuff. And it was always like, no, I am on the other side now.
He seemed happy out.
Simon Harris. How many times did he say there will not be an election before Christmas?
We live in post-truth environment.
Simon Harris is doing well. He's gotten compared to Jim McGuinness and Michael Murphy now on this podcast. But just the final point is that it's interesting because there's going to be more players, especially forwards like Murphy, at that age thinking, do you know what? Yeah, I will go back. I can play. I can sustain my career. Have a football life balance, if you want to call it that as well. And I can't track back Brendan Rodgers even if I wanted to. But then there's also going to be players in the middle eight who all the comments after those interprovincial games, those trial runs, was that it's so fast in the middle. There's so much work. And even James McCarthy, the fittest of them all, is like. He took one look at those rules and said, not for me, stepped away. So there's going to be an interesting dynamic.
There's going to be, as I mentioned it before, one of the Smiths from Roscommon saying, we've been coached to play football laterally and backwards for 10 years. This is going to be really hard change for us, Yeah.
Somebody like Brian Fenton will be a great kind of study because of the impact he's had over the last, say, 10 years with Dublin, and these new rules and how they'll impact him. Will be an interesting one for me this
somebody
summer.
Who was unfazed by the last game. He was still amazing at it, and how he'll impact.
It'll be interesting to see how he adjusts when it's so fast. It'll be interesting to see whether he feels he has the same control.
Folks, we are out of time. That was absolutely brilliant. Thanks very much for joining me, John Green, Sarah O'Donovan and Tommy Martin. We'll let you get back to your Virgin Media television duties, but only when Joe comes back to replace you.